15 hours a week. That's how much the most influential economist of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, predicted in 1930 that we'd be working by around now. He looked at the advance of machines and concluded that, in 100 years, humanity's great problem wouldn't be producing enough. It would be what to do with all the free time. We're almost in 2030, and most people work more than that, not less. Was Keynes wrong? Maybe he was just early. Because for the first time in history, the three forces this channel has been dissecting are arriving together. Artificial intelligence taking over mental work, robots taking over physical work, and a life so long that the old career map stopped working. In this episode, the last of a series of 4, I won't promise you paradise or sell you panic. I'll ask the question that stitches it all together. What if work, as an obligation to survive, simply stops being the center of human life? What's left of a person when the machine does the work? The answer is stranger and older than it seems. And it begins by understanding why Keynes was wrong the first time. Let's gather what we've built so far, because this episode only makes sense on the shoulders of the other 3. In the first, we saw the artificial intelligence agents take over knowledge work, writing, analyzing, coding. In the second, robots advance on physical work, from factories to warehouses. In the third, human life stretched toward 100 years, creating careers that could last 6 decades. And in the fourth, the diploma, the map that told you what to study for that world, lose its validity. Look at what appears when you overlay the 4. If the machine takes over both mental and physical work, there's less and less task that strictly requires a human. If life gets long, there are more decades to fill. And if the traditional path of preparing for work no longer guarantees anything, the very logic of organizing life around a job starts to tremble. Notice, each previous episode dealt with a single force and ended at the same crossroads. This episode is that crossroads. The question that emerges from the sum of the 4 isn't about technology. It's about what a human life is when the need to work to eat stops being the axis everything turns around. But before imagining that world, we need to understand why it has already been promised and why the promise failed. The idea that machines would free us from work isn't new. It's one of the most repeated and most broken promises in history. When Keynes wrote in 1930 that his grandchildren would work 15 hours a week, he wasn't a naive dreamer. He was the most respected economist in the world, watching productivity soar. And he wasn't alone. With each wave of automation, someone announced the end of work. And each time, the opposite happened. Jobs nobody imagined appeared. Why? Because of a thinking trap economists call the lump of labor fallacy, the mistaken idea that there's a fixed amount of work in the world, running out as machines take their portion. In practice, whenever technology eliminated tasks, the wealth it generated created demand for new tasks. The bank teller became a relationship manager. The laborer became a technician. Work didn't end. It transformed and multiplied. And each time what happened was the opposite of the prediction. That's why a lot of smart people today shrug and say, "We've heard this before, it'll all work out again." And maybe it will, but there's a difference this time that the optimists tend to ignore. A difference that might, finally, prove Keynes right. Wait until you see what it is. Every time automation arrived, it replaced one kind of work and pushed humans toward another. The steam engine took physical effort, and we migrated to tasks that required the mind. The computer took calculation, and we migrated to judgment and creativity. Notice the escape pattern. There was always a floor above to run to, a kind of work the machine couldn't yet reach. The difference this time is that artificial intelligence and robotics are climbing the stairs at the same time. One attacks cognitive work, the other physical. For the first time, the 2 floors we historically fled to are being occupied in parallel. It's not a machine that does one thing. It's a general-purpose technology that learns to do almost anything and that improves itself in cycles of months. Careful, and this matters. This doesn't prove work will end. It's a projection, not a certainty, and history teaches us humility. But it's the first time the escape to the floor above has no obvious floor above. If even judgment and dexterity, our last refuges, become partly automated, the question stops being where humans migrate. It becomes a much deeper one. What if there's no new place this time to run to? Here's the catch. That's where the three real problems appear. The first problem is the most obvious and the most urgent. If the machine does the work, where does people's money come from? Throughout the industrial era, most people's income came from a simple exchange. You sell your time and effort, and you get a wage. That wage is what links the ordinary citizen to the economy. Now imagine, as a projection, that a growing slice of production is done by machines that earn no wage. Wealth is still generated, maybe more than ever, but the channel that distributed that wealth to people, the job, starts to narrow. It's a decoupling. Production rises, and the link between producing and earning weakens. That's exactly the fear behind the increasingly serious debate around ideas like universal basic income, the proposal to pay everyone an unconditional amount. I won't defend or condemn that policy here. It's the subject of experiments and legitimate controversy, and economic decisions like that are yours and your representatives. What matters for our lens is the problem it tries to solve. In a world where human work is worth less as an input, society has to invent a new plumbing to carry income to people. Without that plumbing, an abundance of production can coexist with scarcity in the wallet. And that leads straight to the second problem, which is even harder. Here lies the most dangerous confusion in the debate about the future. Imagining that if machines produce everything in plenty, everyone will automatically live well. Abundance of production does not in any way mean fair distribution. History already showed us this. The Industrial Revolution multiplied global wealth, but it took generations for that gain to actually reach the ordinary worker. The hard problem was never just producing, it was distributing. And a technology that concentrates power tends to concentrate its fruits too. If a handful of companies and countries that own the artificial intelligence and the robots capture most of the value the machines generate, the likely result isn't a paradise for all. It's an inequality humanity has never seen, with a minority owning the machines and a majority disconnected from the productive economy. Notice the cruel paradox. The same technology that could free everyone can, if badly distributed, imprison the majority in unprecedented dependence. That's why the central question of an economy of abundance isn't technical, it's political and moral. Who owns the machines, and how are the gains divided? Technology delivers the possibility of plenty. But it's society that decides whether that plenty becomes freedom for many or power for a few. And even if we solved the money, there would remain a problem no check can pay. Suppose for a moment that the first two problems are solved. The machines produce everything, and income reaches everyone. You'd imagine the problem is over, but this is where the most human and most underestimated one of all appears. For most people, work was never just the salary. It was identity, the structure of the day, a network of relationships, the feeling of being useful, a place in the world. When someone asks who you are, you usually answer with what you do. There's an unsettling observation, which shows up in studies on retirement and which I treat here as a warning sign, not a verdict. Many people who stop working suddenly, with nothing to give meaning to their days, fall ill of purpose before they fall ill of body. Work, however much we complain about it, organizes existence. Removing it without putting anything in its place isn't necessarily a gift. It can be a void. That's why the fantasy of eternal idleness, doing absolutely nothing forever, is, for most, more threat than dream. The human being needs challenge, progress, the sense of mattering. So the real question of a post-work world isn't how to fill your belly without a job. It's how to fill life with meaning when survival stops supplying it for free. And history, surprisingly, has already tested an answer. To imagine a life without the obligation to work, it's worth looking at those who already lived that way. In ancient Greece, free citizens had a word for time released from work, skol, the root of our word school. But pay attention, because here's the twist. For the Greeks, that free time wasn't idleness in the sense of doing nothing. It was the exact opposite. It was the noblest time of life, devoted to thinking, debating, creating, cultivating body and mind, taking part in public life. Manual labor for them was what imprisoned. Freedom was being able to use time on what you choose, not on what you're forced to do. Of course, that freedom had a dark foundation. It rested on slavery, which did the heavy work. And it's precisely here that the analogy becomes fascinating and disturbing at once. Artificial intelligence and robots could become, for the first time in history, a workforce that frees humans without enslaving other humans. In theory, technology could give everyone what only an elite once had at others: expense, genuine free time. The question the Greeks answered naturally, and that we forgot, is what to do with that time. They didn't say rest. They said flourish. And to flourish, not to rest, may be the key to the world that's approaching. Maybe the phrase, the end of work, is itself misleading. What can end isn't human activity. It's the obligation to sell it to survive. Think about the difference between two phrases that seem identical: having to work and wanting to work. One is coercion, the other is choice. Almost everything humanity has produced of greatest value: art, pure science, caring for others, raising children, volunteering. Much of it was never done for money, or was poorly paid precisely because the market can't price it. In a world where the machine covers survival, it's likely that these activities, today at the margins, become the center. The scientist who researches out of curiosity, the artist who creates with no boss, the person who cares for a loved one, the mentor who teaches for the joy of teaching. That work doesn't disappear in a world of abundance. It finally becomes free. It's the most profound reorganization imaginable. Work stops being what you need to do to eat and becomes what you choose to do to matter. This isn't automatic utopia. It depends on solving income and distribution, as we saw. But it shows that the question, what if work ends, may be poorly framed. Work as meaning doesn't end. What can end is work as a prison. And it turns out recognizing this changes everything that comes after. There's a part of human nature that no abundance erases: the search for status, for recognition, for a position relative to others. And it's important to look at this without romanticism, because it explains why material paradise wouldn't automatically make us happy. Even if no one needed to work to eat anymore, humans would keep competing for admiration, for influence, for relevance. The good news, in the form of a projection, is that the object of that competition tends to migrate. When material wealth stops being scarce, it loses force as a symbol of status. After all, what everyone has distinguishes no one. Status then shifts to what stays scarce: genuine creativity, reputation, contribution, the attention you can attract and deserve. We already see signs of this in the digital world, where influence and followers sometimes count for more than net worth. In a world of material abundance, it's likely the human race reorganizes around who creates interesting things, who helps the most, who has ideas that matter. This can be healthy, a competition to contribute, not to accumulate. Or it can be toxic, a race for empty attention. Again, technology opens the door. We're the ones who decide which way to walk. And that decision depends on something almost nobody is building now, though we'll name it later. Here I need to be honest and slow the enthusiasm, because the biggest risk of all isn't in the destination, it's in the path. Even if a world of well-distributed abundance is possible, the transition to it can be brutal. Things don't all change on the same day. It's quite likely that jobs start disappearing faster than institutions can adapt. The systems of education, taxes, social security, social identity, all were built around the job, and institutions change slowly, over years or decades, while technology changes in months. That mismatch is the space where real suffering happens. People losing their livelihood before any new system is ready to support them. The history of great economic transitions is full of generations sacrificed in the middle of the road, who paid the price of a change whose fruits only their grandchildren harvested. Long-term optimism can't become anesthesia for short-term pain. That's why the most urgent part isn't dreaming of the post-work world. It's managing the crossing carefully, rethinking how people support themselves and find meaning while the ground moves. Whoever ignores the crossing, thinking it's enough to wait for the good future to arrive, is exactly who suffers most in it. And the best way to cross with some safety starts by understanding what abundance actually is. It's worth stopping to define, with feet on the ground, what this so-called economy of abundance actually means, because the word abundance promises too easily. Almost everything that has a cost in the world, deep down, comes down to two inputs: energy and intelligence. To produce anything, you need energy to transform matter, and intelligence to know how to transform it. The bet behind the idea of abundance is a projection, not a guarantee, that artificial intelligence makes intelligence cheap and plentiful, and that advances in energy can do the same for energy. If the two fundamental inputs of everything become truly cheap, the cost of producing most things would plummet, and what's expensive today could become accessible to almost everyone. Note the necessary prudence. This is a plausible scenario, not a certain destiny. Plentiful, clean energy is still an open challenge, and productivity gains don't always arrive where you expect. But if that convergence happens, it changes the nature of the economic problem. Throughout all of history, economics was the science of scarcity, how to divide what isn't enough for everyone. An economy of abundance would be something we've never had, the science of managing what's left over. And managing plenty, incredibly, may be harder than managing want. Because plenty forces us to answer a question that scarcity always postponed, and we'll get to it. And here comes the question the Nexialist lens has been chasing since the first episode. The question that stitches the four forces into one. When artificial intelligence thinks, robots work, life lasts 100 years, and the diploma no longer defines your worth, the barest question of all remains: what is a human being for when survival stops being the problem? Throughout history, we never had to answer that, because the answer came from outside, imposed by necessity. You were for surviving, for producing, for securing the bread. Necessity filled the meaning of life without our needing to think about it. A world of abundance removes that crutch. For the first time, on a large scale, the ordinary human would have to choose their own purpose, instead of receiving it ready-made from the struggle to survive. And that is, at once, the greatest liberation and the greatest challenge in the history of the species. Liberation, because it opens the possibility of a life designed by you, not by necessity. Challenge, because freedom without purpose is anguish, and not everyone is prepared to invent their own meaning. The Nexialist answer is that the human is for, precisely, doing what the machine doesn't, giving meaning. Connecting, judging, creating, caring, asking why. In a world where everything can be produced, the most human work left is deciding what's worth producing and why. And that, nobody outsources. All of this can sound distant, philosophical, something for your grandchildren, but there's a concrete advantage for whoever understands the design early, and it doesn't depend on guessing the exact date of the future. Whoever internalizes where the four forces point makes different decisions today. Instead of anchoring their whole identity to a job, they start building sources of meaning that don't depend on a salary. Relationships, their own projects, mastery of a craft they love, the capacity to create and contribute. Instead of competing only for money, they invest in reputation, in creativity, in network, the currencies that rise in value when the material one falls. Instead of fearing free time, they train, starting now, the nearly lost art of using it well, with purpose, the way the Greeks did. None of this is financial advice or a promise. It's a posture, a way of positioning yourself before a tide that has already begun to rise. The person who crosses this transition with their identity tied only to a job and their wallet dependent only on a salary is the most fragile. The one who built meaning, capability, and relationships beyond work crosses standing. The difference, once again, isn't being rich or brilliant. It's starting to ask, before the crowd, the question this whole episode asked: what do I want from my life when working stops being mandatory? And that question deserves an honest answer. Now let me do what almost no video about the future does: argue honestly against myself. Because there's a real chance that much of what I described simply doesn't happen, or takes far longer than it seems. First, artificial intelligence might hit a ceiling. What looks like a curve rising forever can slow down, and decades of tech promises have already let down anyone who bet on the hype. Second, history is on the skeptic's side. As we saw, every prediction of the end of work failed, precisely because human work proved more stubborn and more creative than the machines. Maybe tasks we can't even imagine today will appear again, and the lump of labor fallacy will keep playing tricks on us. Third, society pushes back. Regulation, unions, politics, and the simple human attachment to a job can hold the transition back far longer than technology alone would allow. I take all of this seriously, because thinking well about the future demands taking those who disagree seriously. But notice an important asymmetry. Even if the extreme scenario of the end of work doesn't materialize, the direction of the four forces is already undeniable, and it's already changing your life. You don't need to bet on the radical version for the preparation to be worth it. By the end, the intelligent stance isn't to believe blindly or dismiss with contempt. It's to position yourself for both worlds at once. And that's exactly what the Nexialist reading allows. So let me reveal what this whole series of 4 episodes really means, without softening and without prophesying. It's a projection, not a destiny. The 4 forces we dissected: artificial intelligence, robots, the 100-year life, and the end of the diploma, aren't 4 separate news stories. They're 4 faces of a single transformation, the end of the world organized around the obligation to work to survive. That world lasted so long that we mistook it for human nature. But it was only an arrangement, a phase, and that arrangement is being undone before our eyes. What comes in its place isn't written yet, and that's the most important part. The post-work future isn't one single thing. It can be the greatest liberation in history, time, abundance, and freedom for everyone to flourish as only an elite could before. Or it can be the greatest crisis, extreme inequality, a void of purpose, people made surplus in a world that no longer needs them. Both versions use exactly the same technology. The difference between them isn't in the machines. It's in the human choices about distribution, about meaning, about what we decide to value. The technology only asks the question. The answer is ours, and it's still open. And that, in the end, is why this channel exists, not to predict the future, but to help you read it in time to take part in the answer. Let's land, because a question this big risks turning into pure vertigo. And I'll stress it one last time in this series. Nothing here is financial, political, or career advice for your case. It's a map for you to think with, not a recipe to follow. If the reading of these 4 episodes makes sense, 3 attitudes are worth adopting starting today without needing to get any day to the future right. First, stop tying all of your worth to your job. Build meaning outside it, too. In relationships, in creation, in mastery of something you love, so that if the ground of work moves, you don't move with it. Second, treat meaning and capability as long-term assets, as serious as money, because in a world of material abundance, they'll be the true scarce wealth. Third, take part in the conversation. The post-work future won't be decided by technology alone, but by collective choices about how to share the plenty and give meaning to life. Whoever understands early has a voice in that decision. Whoever only reacts arrives after it's made. The machines will take care of producing. The question left for you, the hardest and the most beautiful, is what to do with a life that no longer has to be spent just to survive. No artificial intelligence will answer that in your place. You've just started to answer it. Now it's on you. Here on Nexialist Future, we don't recap the news. We project what it means for your life. This episode closes a series of 4. The artificial intelligence agents, the robots, the 100-year life, and the end of the diploma, all flowing into this single question about the end of work. If you made it this far, watch the others to see the whole picture. They're the 4 pieces of this puzzle. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments. In a world where you didn't need to work to live, what would you do? Until the next cycle.